Hello and welcome to World Talks on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. The war in the Middle East is reshaping global energy markets and geopolitical alliances. With oil prices surging and Washington considering easing sanctions on Russian oil, the conflict may have major consequences for Europe, Ukraine and the broader balance of power. Joining me now to discuss this is Joshua Burgin. He's founder for the Alliance of Global Security. Joshua, welcome back to TVP World. Thank you very much for taking the time.
Ashim, good to see you this evening. Thanks for having me on.
It's a pleasure as always. So, the war in the Middle East is having repercussions perhaps that many hadn't anticipated. We see what's happening with in countries surrounding Iran. But how is this impacting Europe?
Well, I think you've already touched on it. The Strait of Hormuz, which Iran has at least influence over, is conduit for about 20% of the world's daily energy supply. Iran contributes about 2 to 3 million barrels a day. The remaining countries in the region are putting out around 20 million barrels a day that historically float through that strait. Implications for Europe and beyond are profound, primarily because limitations on that flow of energy creates downward pressure on every economy accordingly.
Right. So the prices of oil as a result of this restriction in the Strait of Hormuz is of course, pushing up the price of oil. And as a consequence, or as a response, President Trump is considering raising sanctions on Russia, or removing sanctions on Russia to allow that Russian oil into the marketplace to reduce that pressure. Your thoughts on that move?
Well, I mean, certainly the president is looking at the situation, and while Iran, for the record, cannot close the Strait of Hormuz, they lack the infrastructure, but they've created sufficient fear to where tankers don't want to go through there, insurance companies don't want to underwrite the passage, so there is a range of pressures. The administration then considering reduction of tariffs. I mean, the tariffs in place have been intentionally put in place to reduce the level of revenues to Russia that's warring on its neighbor Ukraine. Obviously, if by continuing those tariffs it's hurting Europe, I can see the rationale. I would step back to your point about considerations not been taken. I think we've seen now multiple administrations on the U.S. side that have kicked the can down the road. One administration basically gave Iran hundreds of millions of dollars. Others have taken and done very little other than just sort of wring their hands around the problem. I, for one, look at the current situation from the standpoint that the administration has made a bold move in concert with the Israelis. That is certainly, just by the very nature of the actors involved, going to bring sort of howls of protest. But I also think that the Trump administration is looking at the Middle East and understanding that here is a partner it wishes to do business with over time. And I think Iran understands that as well, because it's not just attacking Israel and the United States. It's literally attacking all the various partner countries in the Middle East that the administration wants to do business with.
Right. Now, absolutely, it's becoming more complex by the day. But if we can just focus on the Russian situation at the moment, an increase in prices surely helps Russia, doesn't it, refill its coffers after the sanctions and the cost of waging war?
So the entire situation sort of cuts both ways for Russia. It's loss of a strategic partner, a manufacturer and supplier of munitions, but then the prospect that it perhaps gets to sell energy back to the marketplace. As you already touched on, this creates stresses for Europe. Many of the European countries have taken a firm stand at great cost, and now the idea of rolling that back is no doubt problematic. I think it's a little premature to worry too much about this. Obviously, the administration is pushing hard to secure passage, to strengthen the military position there, to restore faith in the tankers' abilities to move in and out of the region. But I can certainly understand the stresses that European leadership, again, particularly around economies and making sure the economy functions well, would be having vis-a-vis the potential of having to then reduce tariffs on Russia.
Right. Now, what is the likely impact then of these raised revenues going into Russia, on its ability to wage war in Ukraine after the fact that, I mean, Europe has just renewed sanctions against about 1,200 individuals and entities that are Russian. We seem to be coming to some kind of conflicting set of positions between Europe and the US here, aren't we?
Whether it's conflicting set of positions, certainly you make a point about sort of where things are in the war. I mean, the Ukrainians tactically have been gaining advantage on the ground, on the front lines. The Ukrainians have made continuous advances in cross-border strikes. The impacts on Moscow, even in the last 24 to 48 hours, real, not just Moscow, the Kremlin, but Moscow, people living in and around Moscow, having their lives disrupted somewhat. So the notion of the conflict coming almost to a, coming further and further to a head in a certain sense is undercut by what's happening in the Middle East and the idea that a reduction in tariffs would then bring new life in terms of hard currency revenues into Russia. Russia is not doing well in this timeline, as we can see both on the tactical front, but the increased paranoia at the political level. I, for one, if anyone was listening to me, would say, as much as the Middle East is probably necessary in this moment, and you can't back away from it, it's time to see Russia as a threat vector put to an end for all, even if that means short-term pain. The reality is Russia cannot sustain this posture forever, and the degree to which it is clamping down on internal communications, actually, again, harming itself as well as anybody's ability to organize any protests, I think is a real strong signal as to the incredible degree of pressure that's on the Putin regime at the moment. To back away would be a mistake.
Well, it may well be a strong signal, Joshua, but is anyone receiving that signal? There are concerns that many countries, and primarily the US, have kind of moved their attention away from the war in Ukraine towards the Middle East. Are we, is anything going to shift?
Well, we've heard these sorts of headlines for a while. I, for one, don't always believe the headlines around the administration and Russia. Yes, I see and have some concerns around the president's interactions with Zelensky. Even this week, apparently, there was some blowup. But the nature of the situation is such that the U.S. truly can't back away from the scenario in which Ukraine emerges, if not victorious, then at a solid stalemate. And frankly, I think everyone is coming to understand that stalemate with Russia is not in anyone's long-term interest. I think in the same way that those who believe that enduring stalemate with Iran vis-a-vis its nuclear pursuits was also not a viable position either. We can see the asymmetry in which the U.S. has pursued what's happened in the Middle East. Nevertheless, I'm not convinced that Washington at this time is prepared to back away or purely redirect all its attention, no matter what others may think. It is clearly said for some time that Europe needs to stand up, as it has been doing, and I applaud Europe for the positions it's taken vis-a-vis Ukraine. But I also think collectively, hand-wringing is not the approach. Continue being forceful on all fronts is the strategy that will lead to the most success over time.
Right. Well, you say you applaud Europe for taking a firmer stand. Is there more that Europe can be doing to support Ukraine in this particular dynamic?
Well, in candor, having paid attention very closely for a long time, Europe was kind of slow to come to the table, especially under the Biden administration. When Trump arrived and sort of the embrace of Putin, there was a quick move towards Ukraine, which I think is ultimately a good thing. In candor, I think that Europe could have easily chosen to demonstrate strategic autonomy by putting 50,000 co-located troops with Ukrainian troops to fight Russia, and to openly tell Russia, when this is over and you've surrendered, we'll decide whether you maintain your territorial integrity. Obviously, that's not a doable option in Europe right now, but I find it fascinating to hear sort of the dueling language: strategic autonomy, less dependence on the U.S., but yet it's sort of an unwillingness to create a truly viable fighting force, solve the logistical challenges, the manufacturing challenges, etc., that would be required in order to have that strategic autonomy.
Right. Do you believe that Europe should also take a bigger role in the war in the Middle East?
I know there have been calls to do so, and at least according to one headline, President Macron has been unwilling to send a warship to the Strait of Hormuz. To that end, I think if Europe were projecting the sort of power and authority that its size of population and scale of economy affords it, there would be no questions around the Ukraine Russia kerfluffle, and the U.S. would have less constraints to move even more forcefully in the Mideast.
Right. Now, Ukraine is leveraging the experience that it has gained during the war in terms of defending against drones, but also the manufacture of drones. And it's found itself a market, it seems, amongst Middle Eastern countries, including Israel. Do you see this as a kind of an economic, if you like, resurgence of Ukraine, which is going to stand it in good stead when it comes to defending against Russia?
Oh, I would certainly say that there's a big difference between theory and practice. And Ukraine has earned through sweat, blood, and toil the practice when it comes to drone manufacturing at scale, drone deployments in a way that are effective on the battlefield. And frankly, it would be foolish for anyone in the Middle East facing the jihads to not bring in Ukrainian expertise, Ukrainian know-how. Meanwhile, as we're watching in many Western countries, Europe and the United States, the notion of sort of getting into the drone game, not using Ukrainian technology or understandings, but to sort of do something ad hoc, I think that's a big mistake. They tend to be far more costly and less effective. I think Ukraine has a lot to offer here, and anybody that's facing Shahed drones should absolutely be reaching out to Ukraine for expertise, know-how, and be paying good money for it.
Indeed. Joshua Burgin, as always, a pleasure. Thank you very much for your analysis, and have a good day in Florida.
Mr. Kumar, it's always a pleasure. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Bye now. And that brings us to the end of this episode of World Talks. Don't go away. Lots more coming up. Goodbye.